What if I told you that Little Red Riding Hood wasn't meant to be a children's story? What if it was meant to be a warning? There are actually more than just the Brothers Grimm tale, and of course all the other versions that have been released these days, different books, different blogs, different retellings, different films, all sorts. It goes very far back, but as far back as I can find verbally and then written down is, I believe it's in Italy, yes, and I'm not going to try and pronounce the name in Italian because I'll butcher it, but it's basically called The False Grandma. And then there's the version of Charles Perrault, and that was Little Red Cap. And then there's the Brothers Grimm version, which is Little Red Riding Hood, and I'm not going to try and pronounce that in German because I will butcher it. So, we're going to start with the Brothers Grimm version and work our way backwards. You'll find out why. So obviously, most people know it. I'm going to quickly give a brief rundown of it. So there's a Little Red Riding Hood. She loves her grandma very much, and because her grandma loves her so dearly, she gives her a red cloak, which she always wears, thus getting the name Little Red Riding Hood. One day, the grandma's not feeling very well, so her mother sends her off with a basket, and it varies, but in general, it's either cake and wine or cake and butter. I don't know how that's supposed to make anyone feel better, but apparently it does, so we can understand why the life expectancy, the age isn't that high in those days, but I digress. So her mother says, don't dawdle, stick to the path, straight to Grandma's house. When you get there, don't look around in any corners, which is a weird thing to say. Go and greet your grandma. So, okay, right, so Little Red, she's wandering off down the path. And of course we all know she runs into the charming wolf. And the wolf sees her and thinks, oh yeah, she looks tasty. And he thinks, I could get 2 meals for one here if I'm clever. So, the wolf asks, where are you going, Little Red Riding Hood? It's very early in the morning. Where are you going to in such a hurry? She repeats, to my grandma's house. And then, because she's young, she decides to tell him where it is. He says, oh, where is it? And she says, oh, just a quarter league down the road, just underneath 3 tall trees. She's basically just told the wolf where grandma lives. He didn't have to do much for it. So he says, oh, it's still so early and beautiful. Look how beautiful the meadow is with all these flowers. Wouldn't your grandma like some flowers? So she thinks, oh yeah, that's lovely. Still early. So she goes and picks some flowers. The wolf, obviously, as we all know, runs off ahead, gobbles up Grandma. Red Riding Hood eventually starts picking the flowers, gets to Grandma's house. We all know the story. She ends up getting eaten by the wolf. The woodcutter comes and frees them. Now, in the Brothers Grimm story, he cuts the wolf open. Little Red and Grandma are still alive in the wolf's stomach, so he just ate them in one big bite, apparently. So they're still alive, and they fill the wolf's stomach with stones, and then sew it back up. Somehow the wolf is still alive, and then when he wakes up, he basically has a heart attack and dies because he realises his stomach's filled with stones and the woodcutter's there and he's going to die. So that's the end of that one. But the Brothers Grimm add a little bit to the end, just to prove that Little Red's learnt a lesson. So, same situation, she goes to her grandma's house, she doesn't stray from the path, she gets there fine. But then a wolf does see her, follows her, knocks on the door and tries to trick Little Red and Grandma to opening the door. Now they both are wise now. They don't open the door, they notice the wolf. Knowing that they're not going to open the door, the wolf decides to hide on the roof and thinks, okay, I'll get Red Riding Hood when she leaves Grandma's house on the way home. But Grandma says, oh, there's a trough at the back of the house. Let's fill it with the water I cooked sausages in yesterday. So they do, and the wolf can obviously smell this. I'm sure it smells wonderful, but he can smell this sausage water. So the wolf, it smells nice, so he leans over to investigate, falls in the trough and drowns. So, just to show, she's learnt a lesson. So, she's learnt a lesson. That's the end of the Brothers Grimm tale. Next, we've got the Charles Perrault version, which is decidedly darker. So grimmer than the Brothers Grimm version. Basically, similar situation in how she gets there. The wolf approaches her. He ends up finding out where she's going. She goes to Grandma's. But in this situation, there's no woodsman that comes to save her. The wolf just eats her. And she's dead. That's it. Pretty sad. Pretty savage. But this is the story where the Red Hood is added. Because in the very original tale that I'm going to get to in a minute, there is no Red Hood. There is no cloak. This is the version where the red cloak, the hood, starts. And it's theorised that that's because it represents sensuality, sin, passion. Some scholars say menstruation, like going from a child to a woman. Check my list. Oh, and danger. So I think he's hinting at the dangers of becoming a woman and not a girl, and to not trust the sly, smiling stranger that is trying to trick you, and to take care of your virtue. And he basically says something along those lines. At the end of the story, he says it's a warning that all well-mannered young ladies should not chance with a questionable gentleman, pretty much. Sorry. So it's sort of a warning to females to be aware. But again, it's putting the burden of protecting themselves on women and not telling men not to be predators, but we all know. So it was like a cautionary tale, that one. Well, it was clearly more cautionary than the Brothers Grimm version, because in that one, Little Red and Grandma got saved. Now, the really disturbing version is the false grandma. Again, I'm not going to try and say it in Italian because I'll just butcher it and upset a lot of people. So, now this one, it was more like a verbal telling that got passed down. I don't think there's any solid writings of it, but it generally goes that Riding Hood, I think she's more older in this story, like a older teen, I think is how it comes across. She's on her way to Grandma's house. She meets the wolf. Oh, in this version, by the way, it's not a regular wolf, it's a werewolf. She meets the wolf on the path. And he says, "Oh, where are you going on this fine day?" "I'm going to my grandma's house. She doesn't feel very well." And he says, "Oh, will you take the path of needles or will you take the path of pins?" And she says, "I'm going to take the path of needles." And this, I think, is because, and a lot of folklorists have discussed this, the needles represent, like, being a woman and homely and motherly, like needle and thread and all that kind of stuff. And pins represent promiscuity and being vain and that kind of thing. So she takes the road of needles. Now, either way, it doesn't matter which one she takes because they both end up at the same place. Now, in this tale, it's quite disturbing because when she gets there, obviously Grandma's already been eaten, like in all the other versions or most of the other versions, and the wolf is already there. But what the wolf does is really quite sinister. He saves a part of the grandmother's flesh and puts it in the pantry. And he bottles some of her blood, puts it on the table. And when Little Red gets there, he says, "Oh, there's some meat in the pantry you can go and eat. And there's some wine on the table that you can drink." And so she eats and drinks it. And then the grandma's cat, which is a bit savage, people say it's a warning. It's more like, "Are you shaming? She doesn't know." Says, "Only a slut would eat their grandmother's flesh and drink their blood." But obviously, like, oh, okay, judgy cat. But again, it was said that the cat represented witchcraft and it was some sort of like unholy communion she was taking part in, you know, instead of Jesus' blood, it was grandma's blood she was drinking. And instead of like the representation of Jesus' flesh, it was her grandma's flesh. So there's some connotations towards that. So that happens. And then the wolf says to Little Red, "Oh, come get in bed with me." She says, "Oh, okay. But first, take off your stockings." "Oh, okay, where shall I put them?" "Put them in the fire. You don't need them anymore." So she takes them off, puts them in the fire. "Okay, take off your apron." "Oh, where shall I put my apron?" "Put it in the fire. You won't need it anymore." So on and so forth, down to a dress, a bodice, everything. Everything has been burnt in the fire. Now at this point, Little Red already knows she's in trouble, she's in danger. And I don't think it's because she's trying to be promiscuous. I think she's trying to stall for time. I think she's trying to buy time to think of a plan, because she's like, okay, I'm stuck in this situation with a dangerous character, and he's not even hiding who he is. He's just in plain sight, which is terrifying. You know, it's like the inner beast, but he's just letting it show. Like, yeah, I'm a beast, what are you going to do about it? So all the clothes are burnt. Get into bed with me, Little Red. So she does. And then she very cleverly says, "Oh, first, I really need the bathroom." And at first, the wolf is skeptical because he thinks, oh, she's going to do a runner. So he goes, "Okay, you can go to the bathroom," which obviously in those days was in the bushes. "But I'm going to tie a rope around your ankle." So she said, okay, ties the rope around her ankle. She goes outside to the bushes and she slips the rope off and ties it round a plum tree and runs home, naked, in the dark, cold and terrified and traumatized, but she gets home to safety. Now, this one is my favourite for obvious reasons, not because it's so dark, but she saves herself. Not only does she not get eaten like in the Charles Perrault version, she doesn't need saving by the woodcutter. Sadly, Grandma does not survive in this one, but she uses her own wit, her skill. She buys herself some time by sort of playing, and a lot of people refer to the undressing and the burning of her clothes like a striptease. I don't think she's doing that to be sensual. I think she's doing that to buy time, to think of a plan, because it's the predicament she's in. And I don't know if, you know, it's supposed to be like people saying it's actually a wolf, but I think the message is be careful, because, what was it, a quote I read? The gentle wolves are the most dangerous. They're charming, they're kind, they come across all well spoken and lovely, and then once they've got you where they want you, you know, you're in a situation. And she thought of a plan, she used her wits and her bravery and got herself out. And I think it's basically every version of it is a story of survival. Not the Perrault one, that was a warning of being careful with your virtues, but it's a warning still of protecting yourself. But it's a story of trauma and survival and protecting yourself against the horrors of the world. And don't take your cloak off. Don't let the wolf in. Stay on the path. And it's not to mean like if you really just stay on any one path. I think it means trust your gut. Follow what you think is the right thing to do. And if something gives you a bad feeling or you're not sure, don't do it. And when you're given the first opportunity to get out, get out. It's a story of surviving and recovering trauma. Because even the Little Red that got saved by the woodcutters, that's still traumatic. She's been swallowed by a wolf. You know, and we all know vaguely what each story represents. They've not really been eaten, they've been attacked. And that is traumatizing. So obviously in one version she was saved, one version she was not, and one version she saved herself. And that's the one I like the best. So, I know it sounds really dark. It also leads into when I spoke about this in my werewolves video. It was a similar time, I believe, but most of these stories became popular when it was a similar time around the witch trials, but there was like werewolves being hunted and people just being scapegoated for being werewolves. And I think they all got tied into this amalgamation of a story, and they were used as the scapegoat. Like, okay, we'll use a big bad wolf because there's been all these werewolf attacks, and we can put it into a story as like a warning. It's very sad because a lot of these werewolf attacks, some were actually just wolves that were wild and starving because of the time that it was, and some that was being called werewolves was just mentally ill people or outcasts like hermits or beggars or poor people or mentally ill people that might have done some dodgy stuff, might not, or just might have been the scapegoat that needed to be blamed for things going wrong. And then that's what became the symbolism to represent danger in these stories. I hope I'm explaining myself well. But I think the combination of real life events taken from a certain point in time and put into these stories in the way they have is very interesting in the representation of how real life affects storytelling and how people get warnings and, create messages out of things like that. Also, surprisingly though, there's different parts of the world that at that point in time in history couldn't have really, spoke to each other because it was before mail or anything. Like I said, 15th centuries and stuff. Different parts of the world. So I believe in India there was one really similar, but it involved a tiger. Another one involved a jackal, and each one is slightly different, but the premise is basically the same. Sorry. And it's a warning to protect yourself and be aware of danger and be aware of these predators. In other words, warning girls, protect yourself, because there's always going to be someone out there that wants to hurt you, which is really sad also that women have been preyed on for this long and it has to be put in a story form for it to be acceptable to say the quiet part out loud because you're saying it in a story. Because you couldn't just have these open conversations like we can now about protecting anyone, any vulnerable population. They had to put it in a fable. And that's what ended up happening. So I really like Little Red Riding Hood because, like I said, I think in some ways it's sad that the girl is preyed upon, but it shows how remarkably strong and courageous she is in the versions that she saves herself. And that's what I really like about the story. I hope that all came across clearly. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope maybe you read or look into or watch some different versions of Little Red Riding Hood and let me know your thoughts. I'm going to do some more haunted histories soon. More around Halloween time, but some more are going to come in between then. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I shall speak to you all soon, my haunted little pickles.